Hi there, John Moore here, and I am a shamanic teacher and practitioner here in the state of Maine in the US, also known as New England area, the upper Northeast. Um, and today I want to talk to you about fairies and shamanism and fairies and elves and gnomes and oh my, and all of those things, and how in shamanism we interface with these beings and are they real and XYZ. So, long story short, belief in, shall we say, little people is almost universal, right? So when you think of fairies, depending upon where you come from, in popular culture, we have like Tinkerbell, and we've got books of fairy books and all these things. And I have daughters, and they were really into fairies for a really long time when they were little. And we had books, and we had dolls, and we watched all the Tinkerbell movies and all of these things. So there were these like little people with wings, and they flit around and that sort of thing. And we also have in English, we have the word fairy tale, which usually indicates something that is untrue, that's fantastic or untrue. When you say, that's a fairy tale, you're really saying you're making up a story, that's not true. And there's a little bit of history behind this. There were a couple of girls in the UK who took some photos of fairies I think early in the 20th century, and they were blurry, and some people looked at them as proof of the existence of fairies and that sort of thing, but they it did wind up being a hoax. They had, I think, cut out paper dolls or something and put them up on sticks in the garden, and the photographs were so blurry that you couldn't tell really what they were, but they got enhanced when somebody touched them up and gave them very human looking features and whatnot. So anyway, let's get back to these little people that exist all over the world. So in Hawaii, we have the Menehune. In throughout Europe and Scandinavia, we've got elves and dwarves and fairies and all kinds of creatures. In West Africa, we have the kontomble, little people. There are little people throughout Asia as well. So what the heck is going on here? Why do all of these disparate cultures see these beings? Well, in shamanism, we would call these nature spirits. So these are spirits, non-human people, which is a phrase I picked up from somebody that I really like. I really enjoy that phrase because in shamanism, it's all about being in relationship to spirit. And when we treat others, including non-humans, as we would want ourselves to be treated, it creates a good relationship. So these are nature spirits. They exist on a sort of at a different frequency. They exist in what we would call the shamanic middle world, which is also where we live, but it's the spiritual component of where we live. And some of these beings, and I'm going to tell you my own story in a moment, some of these beings exist in a frequency. If you think about the physical world and the spiritual world as sort of like being in different frequencies of the radio dial. So in your car, you tune your radio. You're not, your radio isn't going somewhere, or it's not. Those radio waves are already there. They're all already there. It just happens, you happen to be tuning to those frequencies so that your radio can, play the music or speech or whatever, static, who knows, whatever you're picking up on your radio. That comes through, and all of those radio waves exist in the same space at the same time. And how can they do that without interfering with each other? Well, if you have two radio waves operating two radio, transmitters operating at exactly the same frequency, they will interfere with each other. But if they're at different frequencies, they can coexist and not cause interference. Basic physics of it. So spirits are kind of the same way. So we exist on the physical plane, which is a very obviously sharp-edged. We have form, we have mass, all these things. And then below that, there's this sort of etheric or energy plane that also still has some shape and time and space. And below that is the astral. And these are just models, but they're kind of subtler and subtler levels of existence. Different planes, if you will, different worlds. And so these nature spirits live in different plane. They're somewhat etheric, somewhat astral. And so like human beings, we have a physical presence, we have a mental presence, we have an etheric and a astral and a soul body and a spirit body and all of these things. We are multidimensional, but we mostly pay attention, most of us mostly pay attention to our physical reality, because this is the most dense world that we live in. But we can interface with the spirit world, and that's what shamans do all the time. This is our main practice, is that we travel in the spiritual realms and we interact with spirits, different spirits for different purposes. These beings live in, they are frequently tied to locations. So, and they're everywhere. It's usually, if you can perceive them, it's usually fairly crowded. Wherever you can perceive them, there are lots of them. And for me, in my experience, they come in all different sizes and shapes. And if you've ever seen the movie Pan's Labyrinth, where there are fae or representatives of the fae or fairies or fauns or what have you, there are these beings that are all different sizes and shapes and species and what have you. And that is very much what it is like for me when I interface with these spirit beings. In many cultures, although, in modern times, we look at these things as non-real, as mythological beings. And by myth, we mean a story that isn't true, but there's, lots of myths have some truths to them. So we look at these as frequently as non-real, as figments of imagination and that sort of thing. But I can tell you they are, and some of them can interface with the physical world, and it does happen from time to time. People see them who are not necessarily entranced or in a specific shamanic state of mind or that sort of thing. Much, much easier to interact and see them in non-ordinary reality, which is the place where shamans go when we journey. So let me tell you a little bit about my initial, I've had a few experiences, and this is decades ago, before I started studying shamanism, and I definitely did not believe in little people, and I was definitely not a strong believer in things like ghosts, and I'll do a whole other video on ghosts and that sort of thing. But I was definitely not a believer. I probably believed in spirit. I meditated a lot, and I was training in martial arts. And I used to practice in my teacher's basement in Boston. And we'd go down the basement and we'd train. And one day I was working out with another student. It was only us in the dojo space. And then, my teacher was in another room. And we're training together. We're working out and practicing some techniques. And I see what looks like this about a 2-foot tall little man who is about green in color, wearing clothes and a hat, just come running through the room and right through the wall, like just pass through the back wall. And I looked, and I must have had a weird look on my face, because that to me was a figment of my imagination. What's going on here? I don't know. I mean, that can't be real. And my friend who I was working out with looked at me and goes, "Did you see that?" And it's like, what did you see? He goes, did you see that little guy just run through here? So he had seen it too. He had seen the same thing. Then 60 seconds later or so, my teacher comes in from the other room and said, what happened to your little friend that just ran through here? So he had seen him too from the other room come through the hallway. So three of us had seen the same thing, or at least very close to the same thing. We'd witnessed the same event, and it gave me the chills at the time. I was like, when you experience something that is beyond what you normally believe in, it can definitely have that effect. It can definitely have a shaking effect. So over the years, practicing shamanism, do a lot of work with nature spirits, and I've done, some research about them as well. And there is, particularly in the British Isles, a whole fairy faith, which is not hugely popular these days, but was in older times. And people really interacted with these beings. You might know the leprechaun from Ireland, and there's all kinds of names for these beings, for these non-human people throughout the British Isles. There are brownies and green coats and sprites and fairies and gnomes and all kinds of stuff, things I can't even remember. These beings are very, very close to nature in my experience. We call them nature spirits. They sort of like Tinkerbell. If you've ever seen the Tinkerbell movie, they do sort of take care of nature, and they can get a little upset if you disrespect nature, if you litter or you do something destructive, that sort of thing. And it's a really good idea if you live wherever you live, to make peace with the spirits of place, because they will look out for you. They will look after you. They'll look after your space. They'll look after your property, all of those things. So I have a nature spirit altar outdoors. I go out to it fairly regularly. I offer food. Yes, I know the animals come and get it, but it is an offering of energy. It's an offering. It's an exchange. And in spirituality, sometimes we lose the exchange part in the relationship. And if you go to church, if you're the kind of person who goes to church, you probably donate money to or temple or synagogue or mosque or whatever. If you belong to some sort of organized religion and go to a place where there is worship, you probably give donations to that, because without that, the building wouldn't exist, and you couldn't pay the clergy, and you couldn't buy the supplies that you need and pay for the lights to be on in the building. But beyond that, beyond supporting the church, there's this idea of spiritual exchange. I'm going to offer you my energy in the form of money or food or what have you, pour out some wine or mead or all of those things to show you that I want to have good relationship. And in shamanism, everything has a spirit, or everything is a spirit. So even if I put food out and the animals eat it, there's a spiritual component to the food. And nature spirits are also very close to the animals. So even though the animals are eating the food that I put out, they are appreciative that I'm taking care. I'm not putting out food. I'm obviously putting out food that's good for the animals. I'm not putting out unhealthy food. I put out fruit and berries and nuts and seeds and that sort of thing that healthy for the local animals. And I also make offerings when if I go out in nature and I collect things, which sometimes I do. I need for certain purposes, rocks or seashells or what have you. And I always ask in my heart, and this is a good practice to get into, is it okay if I come across a rock that looks interesting, like I want to use it on an altar or use it for divination or something? I will always ask permission in my mind. I'll say, is it okay for me to take this? And usually I'll get a clear kind of yes or no answer. If I get no answer, I'll leave it. If I get a yes, I'll take it. If I get a no, I'll leave it. But if I take it, I might, usually try to leave something as an offering, something that is non-polluting, that is not, not plant material that is invasive or anything like that. Something like I might leave cornmeal. I live in the North America, where cornmeal was a very common offering. So it's something that the nature spirits around here are pretty used to. I live on land that was traditionally occupied by the Wabanaki, and I believe anyway that they grew corn and probably did offerings with corn in the area. But you can do the same. And if you live in a culture where there is faith or practices that involve making offerings to spirits of place or nature or that sort of thing, follow those local customs. It's a really good idea. It pays off. It's not. I don't do it because, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get something back. I do it because it feels good. Like it feels like the right thing to do. But also I do like to keep a good relationship with these beings. And when I'm offering them this spiritual material, it is definitely appreciated. So anyway, this is this video has been about shamanism and the fae or fairies, and it's spelled lots of different ways: FAE and FAI and RY and RIE and all of these different ways. But it is a real faith, old world faith called fairy faith, and there were people who worked with them and made offerings to them, and it was very traditional in almost every culture to leave offerings to the little people. And sometimes they're I'll talk a little bit about the mischief angle, right? Because sometimes they're known as tricksters, right? So leprechauns and fairies, and oh gosh, there's lots of stories about not crossing into fairy rings, right? Which are mushrooms that grow in a circle in the ground, and don't cross into those, and that's where the fairies dance. And if you interrupt their dance, they might steal you away to the fairy realm, and you'll be returned 100 years later, not having aged, and nobody will know who you are. And there's all kinds of that sort of stuff there. I have not experienced malevolence, I'll put it that way. Tricksters, absolutely. And tricksters that can interface with the physical world. Stuff going missing and showing up in weird places, or stuff showing up that had no business being there. All kinds of mischief they can get into, and sometimes they think that's funny. I've never experienced maliciousness. They definitely are protective, and I don't know where some of these stories come from about the malicious nature, about kidnappings and changelings and all of that sort of thing. I don't know the exact truth of it, but I do know that very frequently, particularly in Europe, when Christianity came in to that area, a lot of pagan traditions and faiths and stuff were turned into evil, turned into the devil. The devil having horns and hooves. That's basically the Greek god Pan, right? So they turned to and the word demon just means spirit in Greek, and you had good demons and bad demons and all of these things, but demon has a whole different meaning in Christianity. So when Christianity came through, they turned a lot of, when they burned down the temples and burned the books and persecuted pagans, they turned a lot of pagan, they co-opted holidays, they turned pagan stuff into Christian stuff, or they turned a lot of pagan gods, goddesses, and spirits into demonic beings. And I don't know if that's where these stories came from, but that might make sense to me if, the stories of kidnappings and that sort of thing. I have not seen people physically phase into the fairy realm. Is that possible? I don't know. I have not experienced it, but I always leave myself open to the possibility that something something like that could happen. I have I have yet to be able to do that. I haven't tried, but when shamans enter the middle world, it's usually through journeying, which is just on a spiritually conscious level. So anyway, with that, I will wrap this up. I will most likely be doing much more in the future on fairies, the fae, little people of different sorts throughout the world. It's a topic that I love. I have a great love for my non-human people friends, and it's something that is worth exploring because these are spirits of place, and these are spirits that are very close to the physical world, and so they're very close to us. That's different than gods and goddesses who are very, much further removed from the physical world and other, sort of, I don't want to say higher order spirits because there isn't really a hierarchy. They just live at a different level. It's not quite as easy to directly interface with them. So, that being said, I will wrap this up. I hope you are happy and healthy and you stay so. We're coming into the holidays here. Hanukkah just started. I mean, depending on when you watch this video, but Hanukkah just started here. Yule and Christmas are coming up. We've got, everything else. Diwali has passed, but everything else coming up. So I definitely wish you well over the holiday season and off into the new year. And please subscribe to my channel. I will have lots more to come, and I will talk to you real soon.